It was right here that I think I broke my nose for the first time. We were playing a really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted.
You persisted.
This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello? Hey, brother!
How you doing?
After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
now it's official, we are in a recession.
That's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for president of the United States. I have lived opportunity, and I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president.
South Carolina State University, how y'all doing today? I'm gonna keep my remarks pretty brief. My name is Starr. I'm a hip hop artist. I was born and raised in a small town in the low country called Pineville, South Carolina, okay? It's kind of surreal for me even being here right now because my mother attended South Carolina State University. And I remember being really, really young before I understood what college even was. All I would hear about was Henderson Davis players all the time, okay? So I'll tell you how I got here and I'll tell you why I'm here. Again, I'm from a small town called Pineville, South Carolina, and when my mother did attend here, she was a drama major and she was an English minor. And I ended up being a hip-hop artist, and partially why was because in our household, those two things were stressed incredibly, the arts and education. I think those things are incredibly important, and it's helped to shape my life and the direction of my life. I remember the day I came and told my mom that I was gonna embark on a career being a hip-hop artist, and she was incredibly supportive. And it's my career and where it has brought me that has led me to where I am, supporting Senator Elizabeth Warren for president. I come from a place where all of the issues that we're talking about nationally, it pretty much affects us here in South Carolina, especially in the low country. I've come from a place where I've seen land justice, a need for land justice. I've seen how farmers have been devastated. I've seen how black landowners have been devastated. I've seen the importance of housing and what happens when affordable housing is not prevalent. I remember when my mother gave birth to my little sister, being in that rural area and her having to drive 20 to 30 minutes to find childcare. I talk to my friends, my brothers all the time, and they talk about the expenses, the costs of childcare. All of these things are incredibly important. They're incredibly important to me, and I make sure that in my work, that is the basis of my subject matter because I stand in the long line of artists who have not been afraid to use their voice to push for change. Artists like Paul Robeson, artists like Nina Simone, artists like James Baldwin. That's why I'm here today. And I'm thankful to be here today with you. And without further ado, one of those artists who I also stand in the line of, who has never been afraid to use their voice to push for change, that has never been afraid to use their voice to lift up the voices that have been silenced. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you an incredible songwriter, incredible musician, an incredible person who is not afraid to leverage his platform. A person that I'm thankful is in this fight to get Senator Elizabeth Warren elected to the presidency of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for John Legend.
Hello. I am so fired up to be in South Carolina today. Very happy to be here at South Carolina State. Thank you for having me. I bring you greetings from the great state of California. My wife, Chrissy, says hello too. She sends her love. I'm happy to report that we received our mail-in ballots back home in Los Angeles. The ballots are due in March, but I'm proud to say that I've already marked my choice for the presidential nominee from the Democratic Party. I put it in pen because I made my decision and I'm not changing my mind. I believe Elizabeth Warren should be the next president of the United States of America. Now, I could have kept this to myself. At the beginning of the campaign, my intention was to stay out of it. I wasn't going to publicly endorse anybody in the primary. I would just vote for my preferred candidate, and no matter who won the primary, I'd work my butt off to make sure Trump was a one-term president. As I started watching the campaigns, I had an open mind. I wanted to see who made the most compelling case that they were ready to be president of this country. I watched many of the debates. I saw what the candidates were posting on Twitter. I saw them in town halls and interviews. I read some of their policy positions. And as much as I wanted to publicly stay out of it, it became abundantly clear to me that one candidate stood out from the rest. The one candidate was my clear choice among a very talented field. That one candidate was Elizabeth Warren. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you why I'm so confident in Elizabeth Warren. First of all, she is brilliant. Now, I know the bar is very low right now. We currently have a president who embarrasses this great nation every single day with his incompetence, his unabashed ignorance, his lack of curiosity. Wouldn't it be so refreshing to have a woman of Senator Warren's brilliance replacing him? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a woman who came from humble beginnings, worked her way through college and law school, and ascended all the way to become a Harvard law professor, a U.S. senator, then president of the United States? Wouldn't that be magnificent? But it's not enough to be brilliant. In a democracy, we don't simply rely on leaders to tell us what they know, to issue commands from high up in their ivory tower. We depend on our leaders to listen to us. The best leaders in a democracy are far more than just smart. The best leaders in a democracy have empathy. They care about ordinary people. They are intentional about paying attention to the everyday struggles of people who are often overlooked. Great leaders in a democracy care about the sick, the forgotten, the marginalized, the poor, the disenfranchised, the incarcerated. They go out of their way to understand the problems that people face, and they have the passion and resolve to do something about it. How do I know Elizabeth Warren practices empathy? I hear it in the way she answers questions about policy, about what she would do in office. If you listen closely, She doesn't just rattle off her policy prescriptions. More than any candidate that I've seen, Elizabeth's answers about policy start with a story about people. She talks about a mother she's met who's struggling to get childcare, the family she's seen driven to bankruptcy by medical care costs, the communities harmed by racial discrimination. She understands that this diverse nation has all kinds of people, and they deserve a president who listens to their issues and cares about making the government work for all of them. She doesn't spend time whining and dining billionaires so she can fund her campaign. She spends her time talking to the people. If you donate $5 to her campaign, she just might personally call you up to say thank you. If you wait in line at one of her rallies to shake her hand and take a selfie, even if there's a line of thousands, she often will stand there and do it for each and every person who shows up and waits long enough. Now, why does she do all that? It's because Elizabeth Warren fundamentally believes that our democracy is in danger, that the government has become too corrupt, too beholden to the interests of the powerful and the connected. And the reason she ran is to give this democracy back to its rightful owners. That's you, the people of the United States. That's why she takes the time to listen to everybody, because she knows that democracy is you. And that's why she's got plans. Yes, y'all know. She's got a plan for that. If you know nothing else about Elizabeth Warren, you know that she has plans that will bring meaningful, positive change to the lives of everyday Americans. You see, she combines her brilliance, her deep understanding of the law and the government, with a profound passion for the people, a sense of empathy that informs every plan and every policy. And that's why whenever she says she intends to do something, you can rest assured she's doing it for a reason. She's listened to people like you. She's thought about the impact. She's spoken to experts in the field, and she's resolved to do something to make it happen. Elizabeth knows that our communities need big structural change, that the system has been rigged against too many people for too long. And she has a plan for that. She grew up on the edge of the middle class, and unlike any other candidate, her personal, professional, and political experience has been devoted to the most critical issue of our time, the pursuit of equal opportunity for all in the United States. Elizabeth believes in capitalism but supports rules and enforcement to ensure that it works for everybody, not just the powerful and wealthy. In order for our democracy to work, we need to make sure our politicians know who they're working for. And that's why Elizabeth has the most sweeping anti-corruption plan since Watergate. We cannot wait any longer to undo all the evil, all the corruption that Trump has unleashed in the last few years. But it's not enough to undo this president's damage to this nation. We have to make big changes that have been needed for decades. Our country has been horrible at investing in education. Elizabeth will guarantee high-quality child care and early education for every child from 0 to 5. And then there's health care. The costs are crushing American families, even those who have good insurance. Millions of people with insurance are one bad diagnosis from going broke. That's why Elizabeth supports Medicare for all, and she plans to fully finance it without raising taxes on the middle class by one penny. We also know that racial inequality still runs rampant in our society. We know that this nation's original sin of slavery and its centuries-long devaluing of black lives have had long-lasting effects on the way black folks live in 2020. We've seen the data when it comes to the wealth gap, the home ownership gap, the education gap, the disparities in how we're treated by the criminal justice system. But these aren't just graphs and numbers on the page. These are our lived experiences. Centuries of trauma and exclusion targeted at our communities. Too many of us know what that looks like and what that feels like. And Elizabeth has listened to us. She knows that all this harm visited specifically on the black community, intentionally on the black community, requires intentional remedies, requires solutions that are specifically targeted to our community. She supports creating a commission on reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. Unlike Mayor Bloomberg, she knows that housing discrimination through redlining has been a national tragedy. Her housing plan creates a first-of-its-kind program to help first-time home buyers living in formerly redlined areas buy a home and start building the kind of wealth that government-sponsored discrimination denied their parents and grandparents for decades. She'd commit at least $50 billion in investments in historically black colleges and universities like SCSU. She'd make technical school, 2-year public college and 4-year public college free. She would ban for-profit colleges that prey on communities of color and veterans. She knows that the typical black entrepreneur starts a business with $35,000 in capital, and that's a third of the startup capital for the typical white entrepreneur. The disparity is the single biggest reason that promising black-owned businesses on average are less profitable and bring on fewer employees than white-owned businesses. Elizabeth has a plan for that too. She wants to create a small business equity fund to help close this gap for entrepreneurs of color. And she also knows, like I know, that racism has been codified in our criminal justice system. We are the most incarcerated country in the world, with more jails in our country than colleges and universities. It's outrageous. Elizabeth knows we need progressive criminal justice reform. She will end cash bail, get rid of private prisons, repeal the '94 crime bill, legalize marijuana, and undo the legacy of the war on drugs. Yes. I could go on about Elizabeth's plans. I haven't even talked about what she plans to do on the climate, immigration, protecting women's reproductive rights, but I'm gonna get out of the way so she can tell you herself. But let me just say that none of these plans mean anything if you don't have the persistence, the wherewithal, the passion, the tenacity to get them done. Yes. And that's perhaps what inspires me most about Elizabeth Warren. She persists. She's not afraid of a fight. She's not afraid to take on a challenge. And she has a plan to win. Elizabeth Warren believes in this country. She believes in its people. She believes in democracy, that if we come together, if we listen to one another, if we love one another, if we value each other's lives, we can build a more perfect union. We can address these problems that have been festering for years. We can make big structural change that will improve the lives of millions of everyday people. But none of this happens without the people. It doesn't happen without you. Elizabeth Warren needs you. This country needs you. I vote in California, like I said. I was born and raised in Ohio. Never lived in South Carolina, but I flew all the way across the country to hang out with y'all today. Everybody's watching South Carolina. Everybody wants to know what South Carolina is going to do in this primary. You have the power to send a message that will resound across this nation onto Super Tuesday and throughout this primary process. I know that folks are worried. I'm worried too. I know that Donald Trump is an existential threat to this nation. And everybody's hoping and praying we pick the most electable candidate from the Democratic Party. But the fact is, I can't predict who the most electable nominee is, and you probably can't either. So I'm going to vote based on who I think would make the best president. I want someone brilliant. I want someone empathetic, someone with a plan and the persistence and the fire to make that plan happen. So I hope you will join me I hope you will vote to make Elizabeth Warren the next president of the United States. And it is my honor and pleasure to, without further ado, introduce to you Elizabeth Warren.
Tumble out of bed and I stumble to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition and yawn and stretch and try to come to life. Jump in the shower and the blood starts pumping. Out on the streets, the traffic starts jumping with folks like me.
Hello, South Carolina State. Whoa, it is good to see you this morning. And let me say a very, very special thank you to the amazing John Legend. You know, I love John Legend for his music, but you gotta admit, you love John Legend for his words too. He's a man who's got a lot to say. Way to go, John. I also want to say a very special thank you to Benny Starr, who's been there from the very beginning, another man of incredible music and incredible words. Thank you, Benny. So I'm Elizabeth Warren, and I'm the woman who is going to beat Donald Trump. I'm also going to be the woman who's going to be in the fight to help beat Lindsey Graham and put Mitch McConnell out of a job. Now, South Carolina, we got a lot of work to do. And to get that work done, I just want to tell all of you, I was not born a politician, but I was born a fighter. You bet. And I am ready to fight. Look, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you about some policies because I just can't help it. I got to talk some about them because they're about how we make real the changes we can make. We've had enough of politicians coming in and they make some vague promises every 4 years and then disappear. I want to talk about the real changes we can make, the ones we can make together. And then, instead of doing a selfie line today, we're going to get music from John Legend. So, yeah. So I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I have 3 much older brothers. By the time I grew up in a family that kind of had its ups and downs financially, paycheck to paycheck families. We had better times, we had worse times. But along about the time I was in middle school, all 3 of my older brothers were gone by then. It was just my mama and my daddy and me when my daddy had a heart attack. Now, he pulled through, but he couldn't go back to work. And it meant week after week after week of no money coming in. Even to this day, I can remember on the day when we lost our family station wagon. I can remember how my mother used to tuck me into bed at night, and she'd give me a big smile, and then she'd walk out of the room, and she'd close the door, and I'd hear her start to cry, because she never wanted to cry in front of me. These are the times that I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And I still remember walking into their bedroom one day, and laid out on the bed was the dress. Now, some of you know the dress. It's the one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And there was my mother down in the other part of the room in her slip and her stockings. And she was walking back and forth, and she had her head down. And she was saying, "We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house." She was 50 years old. She'd never had a job outside the home, and she was terrified. Finally, she looks up and she sees me standing in that doorway. She doesn't say anything. She just looks at me, and she looks at that dress, and she looks back at me, and she walks over, picks the dress up, wrestles it on, puts on her high heel shoes, and she walks to the Sears, where she gets full-time minimum wage job answering phones. That minimum wage job saved our house, and it saved our family. And it's the first lesson my mother taught me, that no matter how scared you are, and no matter how hard it looks, you get in there and fight to take care of your family, because that's what we do. But there was a second lesson to that story that I didn't learn until years later. And that is, that same story is a story about government. And I'll tell you how. Back when my mother went to the Sears and got a minimum wage job, a minimum wage job in America would support a family of 3. It would pay a mortgage, it would cover the utilities, and it would put groceries on the table. Today, a minimum wage job will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. That is wrong, and that is why I am in this fight. And understand this difference. It didn't just happen because of gravity, because something happens over time to the minimum wage. No, it happened because of who government works for. When I was a girl, at least the question asked in Washington is, when we set the minimum wage, we need to know, what does it take a family of 3 to survive? What does it take for them to get a toehold in America's middle class, a chance to build something solid? Today, the question asked in Washington is, where do we set the minimum wage to maximize the profits of giant multinational corporations? Well, I don't want a government that works for giant multinational corporations. I want one that works for our families. And that is the fight I'm in. How do we make a government work for us? Think of it this way. We have a government right now. It works great. It works great for giant drug companies, just not for people trying to get a prescription filled. Am I right? Works great for people who want to make money investing in private prisons, just not for the human beings whose lives are torn apart by those places. It works great for oil companies that want to drill everywhere, just not for the rest of us who see climate change bearing down upon us. When you see a government that works great for those with money, works great for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers, and doesn't work for much of anyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple, and you need to call it out for what it is. Corruption. And I got a plan for that. The good news is, it is the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. The bad news, we need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. It's got a lot of pieces to it, but I'm going to tell you just a couple real quick. End lobbying as we know it. They got enough power. Block the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. And you really want to hose out some corruption in Washington? Make everybody who runs for federal office put their tax returns online. Yeah. Because here's the thing. We fight back, and we get this government to represent the people. We push back the interests of money in this country, and we can make big structural change. And I just want to tell you about a couple of parts of this. John talked about it, but I want to talk about it for just a sec. It is time for a wealth tax in America. This is a 2-cent tax on fortunes above $50 million. So I want everyone here to relax. Your first $50 million is free and clear. If that makes you nervous, I may not be your candidate. But your first $50 million is free and clear, but your 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. And 2 cents on every dollar after that, you hit $1 billion, you got to pitch in a couple of cents more. Anybody in here grow up in a family that owned a home or own a home now? Anybody? You've been paying a wealth tax. It's just called a property tax. All I'm saying is for the really richest folks, their property tax should include not just real estate, but also the stock portfolio, the diamonds, the Rembrandt, and the yacht. Now, you may have heard there's some billionaires who don't like this. Some of them go on TV and cry. So sad, right? Some of them run for president. Maybe discovering it's harder than they thought. Here's the thing, though. They say to me, you know, you shouldn't try to take our money away. You shouldn't try to tax this money. We worked hard for it. We had a good idea. We followed through. And my view is, you made $1 billion, good for you. Good for you. But here's the deal. You made $1 billion. You built that fortune here in America. You built it at least in part using workers all of us help pay to educate. Yeah. You built it at least in part getting your goods to market on roads and bridges all of us help pay to build. You built that fortune at least in part protected by police and firefighters all of us help pay the salaries for. And we're Americans, we're glad to do it. We're glad to invest in opportunity. That's who we are. But here's the thing, you make it big. You make it really big. You make it top 0.1% big. Pitch in 2 cents so everybody else gets a chance to make it in this country. Because what can we do with 2 cents? Doesn't sound like much, does it? But with 2 cents, we can provide universal child care and early childhood education to every baby in this country age 0 to 5. 100% of them. Think what that means for those babies and for their mamas and for their daddies. We can provide universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country. And we can stop exploiting the people who do this work. Mostly African American women and Latinas. We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. 2 cents. We can do all that for our babies, plus we can put 800 billion new federal dollars into our public schools. How about that? That would let us quadruple our funding for Title I schools. Think about that. And you'll hear this from a special education teacher. For the first time in history, we could fully fund IDEA so children with disabilities would get the full educational opportunities they deserve. 2 cents. We could do all that for our babies. We can do all that for our elementary kids. Plus, we could provide tuition-free technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college, like right here, tuition-free. Yes. We could increase the Pell Grants so people have real opportunity. And it is time to level the playing field, to acknowledge for years how much support went into universities that then locked their doors to African American students. We could put $50 billion directly into our historically black colleges and universities. Yes. 2 cents. And just one more thing to round out that 2 cents. We can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. Yes, you can. That's what it means to have a plan. A plan to restructure our economy. Because understand this is about our values. We can leave that 2 cents with the billionaires. They already have their fortunes. They're growing those fortunes at what? 4%, 6%, 8%, 10% a year, 2%. They can invest in an entire generation of young Americans. All we have to do is decide we're going to make it happen. Are you with me on that? I want to say one more word about how we make transformative change. There's a lot of places that we need to be doing work in healthcare, and particularly in the high rates of maternal mortality for African American mothers. Yes, you bet. In environmental justice, how we have for generations put polluting plants and toxic waste dumps in or near communities of color, destroying the health of young children and destroying property values. I've committed $1 trillion to cleaning up the mess that America has made for decades in communities of color. So much more we need to do. Close our private prisons, reform our criminal justice system, legalize marijuana. Enough of this. Yep. We got a lot we can do, but understand this. It only happens if you've got power. It only happens if we make this democracy work. Right now, we've got an America where if you're rich, you got a really loud voice in Washington. But if you're not rich, you don't get heard very much at all. So one of the core things we got to do is we got to turn that around. This is about power, about who's got it and who needs a whole lot more of it. So for me, it starts right here. I'm going to push for a constitutional amendment to guarantee the right of every American citizen to vote and to get that vote counted. Also, a federal law to end all political gerrymandering in this country. And one more federal law. A federal law to roll back every racist voter suppression law in America. And just one more. We got to overturn Citizens United. Democracy is not for sale. So here's how I see this. We have such possibility going forward. Such an America that we could build. This isn't an America of the past. That America had real problems. That is the America that elected Donald Trump. We got to build a better America than that. But right now, it's a time of fear for a lot of people in this country. I travel a lot and I hear people and they talk about, they're afraid. 3 years of Donald Trump, they're afraid for their families, afraid for their neighbors and friends, afraid for children locked in cages down at our border, and afraid for children on lockdown in our public schools, afraid for women, afraid for people of color, afraid for LGBTQ people, all of whose rights will be up for grabs in this United States Supreme Court. They are afraid for our nation and afraid for our planet. And the danger is real. Our democracy hangs in the balance in this election. And we have a decision to make. In the face of this kind of danger, are we going to back up? Are we going to get timid? Are we going to crouch down? Or are we going to fight back? Me, I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. I'm fighting back. Fighting back is an act of patriotism. We fought back against a king to build this nation. We fought back against the scourge of slavery to try to preserve this union. We fought back against a Great Depression to rebuild this economy. And we fought back against the rise of fascism to try to protect our democracy. Americans are at our best when we see a problem, we call it out, and we fight back. That's who we have to be. This is no time for small ideas. This is no time to nibble around the edges of what's broken. We have to be in this fight and be in this fight all the way. Understand this. Of all the people who've run for office, who are still running for office for president, who've had elective office, I've been in politics the least amount of time. I came to this as a teacher. I came to this as someone who has spent a life fighting for working families. I didn't run a campaign that was designed to, by a bunch of consultants. I didn't run a campaign that was designed not to offend big donors. I passed that stop sign a long time ago. I run a campaign from the heart because I believe that 2020 is the moment we've been called to in history. The moment in our lives when we will determine the future of this nation, the future of this earth. We are called to this moment, and I am in this fight because I believe in you. I believe in the America we can build together, an America in which every single human being has value, an America in which every child is worth investing in, an America in which, in our democracy, people are more important than money. I believe in that America. And if you can see that America and think that just maybe that America is worth fighting for, then I'm asking you, get in this fight. This Saturday, it is up to you. Get in this fight. I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for you to go to ElizabethWarren.com and sign up an hour of agreeing to do some phone calls, knock on doors, talk to people ahead of you in line at the grocery store or standing next to you pumping gas. But get in this fight, because understand this moment in history will not come our way again. We will not get a second chance. This is our time to choose hope over fear, our time to choose courage over cynicism, our time to dream big, fight hard, and win. Thank you. Really terrific game called Trip 'em. I persisted. You persisted. This is where I grew up. It's always good to come back. Hello. Hey, brother. How you doing? After my brothers went off to the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack. My mom took a minimum wage job to save our house. Now, my parents didn't like to talk about our family's financial problems. I was the opposite. I wanted to pick at it, study it, try to understand it, and do everything I could to make sure it never happened to my family again. I spent years studying and listening to working families like mine. And I discovered a disturbing trend. More and more families were going bankrupt. Families like mine were falling further and further behind. And the crisis was hitting families of color even harder. And it was because Washington was listening more and more to big corporations. I started ringing alarm bells.
The idea that we have a strong economy is just false.
And then,
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
that's when I left the classroom and got in the fight.
Somebody has got to stand up on behalf of middle-class families.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
She's become perhaps the leading voice in our country on behalf of consumers.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable. And when Republicans tried to sabotage reform, I ran against one of them, and I beat him. This election is about power. Who has too much of it and who needs more of it? My daddy was a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, a senator, and a candidate for President of the United States. I have lived opportunity, and I believe that no matter where you live in America and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity. We can take on the rich and powerful to make our government work for all of us. And I'm not afraid to fight for it. That's why I'm running for president.